witnesses and victims, the parties and participants will clearly indicate whether their submissions can be presented in public or whether they deem it necessary to move into private session, notably when referring to items of evidence. The parties and participants will clearly indicate when it is no longer necessary to remain in private session. With these rules in place, we can now move to the reading of the charges in its shortened form, indicating the charges against Mr. Duterte. The full version is available publicly on the internet site of the court. The defense has not raised any objections in this regard. I would like to remind the public that the charges that shall be read out in a few seconds comprise allegations raised by the Office of the Prosecutor that the Chamber shall analyze in order to decide whether the evidence presented by the Office of the Prosecutor is sufficient in order for these charges to be confirmed. Madam Courtroom Officer, would you please read the charges?
The prosecution charges Mr. Rodrigo Duterte with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of murder and attempted murder as a crimes against humanity committed between 2013 and around June 2016 and between around July 2016 and September 2018 in the Republic of the Philippines as follows. Count 1. Murder of 19 victims alleged to be criminals, including 3 children, who were killed in or around Davao City in the Philippines between 2013 and around 2016 by members of the Davao Death Squad, while Mr. Duterte was the mayor of the Davao City pursuant to Article 71A of the Rome Statute. Count 2. Murder of 14 victims labeled as high-value targets for their alleged criminality, who were killed in locations across the Philippines between around July 2016 and July 2017 by a network of perpetrators comprising state actors and others, referred to as the National Network, while Mr. Duterte was the President of the Philippines pursuant to Article 71A of the Rome Statute. And count 3. Murder and attempted murder of 45 victims, comprising 43 murders and 2 attempted murders of persons alleged to be criminals, including 3 children who were targeted in barangay clearance operations in locations across the Philippines between around July 2016 and September 2018 by members of the National Network, while Mr. Duterte was the President of the Philippines pursuant to Articles 71A and 25(3)(f in respect of the attempted murder of the Rome Statute. The prosecution alleges that Mr. Duterte is individually criminally responsible for all 3 of the above counts as follows. First, as an indirect co-perpetrator pursuant to Article 25(3)(a of the Rome Statute. At least between 1st November 2011 and 16 March 2019, Mr. Duterte and his co-perpetrators shared a common plan to neutralize alleged criminals in the Philippines, including individuals perceived or alleged to be associated with drug use, sale, or production, through violent crimes including murder. Mr. Duterte and his co-perpetrators implemented this common plan through the hierarchically organized structures of the Davao City Police of the Davao City Police and Davao Death Squad, and then the national network. Within the framework of the common plan, Mr. Duterte made essential contributions to the crimes in counts 1 to 3 by A. Designing and disseminating the police to neutralize alleged criminals, both in his role as a mayor of the Davao City and also during his presidential campaign and as a president, including by endorsing the anti-illegal drugs campaign Double Barrel. B. Establishing and overseeing the DDS. C. Instructing and authorizing violent acts, including murder, to be committed against alleged criminals, including alleged drug dealers and users. D. Providing personnel and other necessary logistic resources, such as weapons, including those to be used in the execution of the crimes. E. Appointing key personnel to positions which were crucial to the execution of the crimes. F. Offering financial incentives and promotions to police officers and hitmen to kill alleged criminals. G. Creating and maintaining a system in which perpetrators knew they would be protected, including through promises of immunity and shielding perpetrators from investigation and prosecutions. H. Making public statements authorizing, condoning, and encouraging killings of alleged criminals, both as a mayor of the Davao City and as a president of the Philippines. I. Authorizing state actors to take part in the anti-drugs campaign and temporarily revoking such authorization, including to placate public outcry. J. Publicly naming individuals and holding up charts from lists of alleged criminals, including so-called high-value targets, some of whom were subsequently killed. Second, in the alternative, Mr. Duterte is charged with ordering and/or inducing the charged crimes pursuant to Article 25(3)(b) of the Rome Statute, and/or aiding and abetting these crimes pursuant to Article 25(3)(c) of the Rome Statute.
Merci, Madame la greffière.
Thank you, Madam Courtroom Officer. With regard to objections and observations under Rule 122, paragraph 3 of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence, the Chamber notes that the defence submitted a number of written observations, and the last of which was on the 16th of February 2026, to which the OTP and the legal representatives of victims responded, respectively, on the 17th and the 18th of February 2026. On the 20th of February 2026, the Chamber dismissed, in its public decision, the defence's objections. In specifying that the defense and the Office of the Prosecutor are not permitted to reiterate the same arguments already presented in the filings mentioned, that they filed to date in this case, I will now ask if the parties wish to make any oral submissions on this point before moving to the opening statements. Mr. Deputy Prosecutor? Mr. Nyang, we do not have any submissions to make in this regard. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. Counsel?
Madam President, we have no observations.
Merci beaucoup, Maître Kaufmann. Donc, on peut maintenant passer à la phase.
So we can now move on to stage 2, namely the opening statements, and I hand over to the Office of the Prosecutor. Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, please.
Madam President, honorable member of the bench, all those following these proceedings inside the courtroom and outside, and especially those in the Philippines. Today marks an important day for international justice for the people of the Philippines, for the victims, and for this court. The commencement of the confirmation hearing against Mr. Rodrigo Roa Duterte is a reminder of the court's unwavering commitment to its mission to investigate and prosecute individuals for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community and to bring justice to the thousands of victims of the mass crimes and atrocities perpetrated in the Philippines. It is also a reminder that those in power are not above the law. Your Honors, over the course of the next 20 minutes or so, I will provide an overview of the evidence in this case that demonstrates that Mr. Duterte is responsible for the charged crimes. And my team will then develop aspects of this evidence in more details. This case before you today, it is before you today because there are substantial ground to believe that Mr. Duterte is criminally responsible for those three counts of murder just spelled out and attempted murder as crimes against humanity. These charged crimes were committed during the time within the court jurisdiction, which is between the 1st of November 2011 and the 16th of March 2019. At first, they were committed in and around Davao City, where Mr. Duterte was the mayor, and then expanded across the rest of the Philippines when he became president. Mr. Duterte is charged with 49 incidents of murder and attempted murder of 78 victims, including children. These murders and attempted murders were part of a widespread and systematic attack that overall resulted in the killings of thousands of civilians across the country during the relevant time frame. Thus, the charged incidents are merely a fraction of the overall criminality that resulted from Mr. Duterte's so-called war on drugs. What is Mr. Duterte's core contribution? Your Honors, Mr. Duterte played a pivotal role in the commission of the charged crimes. His contribution was essential, as he was at the very heart of the common plan to use his words, to neutralize alleged criminals in the Philippines, including through murders. The victim included individuals associated with or perceived to be associated with drugs. One of the first things Mr. Duterte did when he became the mayor of Davao back in 1988 was to create the infamous Davao Death Squad, otherwise known as DDS. As you will have seen From the prosecution pre-confirmation brief, Mr. Duterte personally instructed death squad members that their mission was to kill criminals and suspected criminals, including drug users and dealers, also referred to as drug pushers. The death squads carried out this mission well into the charge period through 2011 to 2016, perpetrating the crimes charged in count 1. Your Honors, Mr. Duterte's criminal plan and his intent were no secret. He not only shared them with his co-perpetrators and members of the death squad, but also made them abundantly clear to the general public in the numerous public statements that he made time and again. During his presidential campaign, Mr. Duterte explicitly vowed to implement the common plan to neutralize alleged criminal nationwide if elected. This was his program to be elected. He publicly announced his intention to eradicate corruption, criminality, and drugs in 3 to 6 months. And this is what he said. I quote, "If I become the president, I will order the military and the police to hunt down the drug lords, the big ones, and kill them." That's what he said. And this can be found at tab 12 of the prosecution list of material. Similarly, when speaking about druggies, I quote, in a televised interview in 2015, this is again what he said. "If I become president, you will all get wiped out. I will order your execution within 24 hours. That's what he says. That I quote directly from his word. And this quote can be found at tab 19.2 of the prosecution list of materials, ERN PHL OTP 401684, page 003, and these are the lines 82 to 83. And elected he was. And becoming president on 13th of June 2016, this provided him with the opportunity to follow through with his promise and to expand extrajudicial killings of alleged criminals beyond Davao and across the rest of the Philippines. He did this through the implementation of the National Anti-Illegal Drug Campaign, better known as Duterte's War on Drug, and its project, Double Barrel. These were carried out by the national network consisting of law enforcement personnel working together with non-police assets and hitmen. Mr. Duterte authorized murder and personally selected some of the targets. During the mayoral period, when he was mayor, his clearance was required for the DDS to carry out the killings. Essentially, members of the DDS needed Mr. Duterte's green light to murder. And during the presidential period, Mr. Duterte has continued to personally identify some of the targets, including by publicly naming those he claimed were involved in illegal drug trade or in other forms of criminality. He also identified targets by holding up a list containing their name. And if you are on the list, you will be killed. And this was the word of one prosecution witness. And this evidence can be found at tab 54 of the prosecution list of materials, ERN PHL OTP 00015 page 0009, and the relevant lines are 260 to 261. Mr. Duterte provided moral and financial support to the direct perpetrators as well. In a 12 December 2016 speech, Mr. Duterte admitted that he used to ride around Davao on a motorcycle looking for trouble, so he could kill. And he said, and this again his own word I'm quoting here, in Davao, I used to do it personally, just to show the guy that if I can do it, why can't you? And these are his own words. And this quote can be found at tab 16.1 of the prosecution list of material, ERN PHL OTP 0001547 at 0002 lines 7 and 8. And the evidence show that Mr. Duterte's Davao City Mayor office provided some member of the DDS with a regular salary. Financial rewards were also given to direct perpetrators in the form of cash per head for killing. And at a press conference in 2013, Mr. Duterte stated that shoot to kill orders and reward are, and I quote him, are legitimate tools of government to fight lawlessness. This is his own word. And if he surrendered to me or his carcass dead, then I double the price. And again, yeah, and that was what he boasted. This quote can be found at tab 17.2 of the prosecution list of materials, PHL OTP 000094932 at 0002, and the relevant lines are lines 7 to 11. Deaths of drug personalities killed in anti-drug operation were endorsed by Mr. Duterte's administration and listed as official accomplishment in public reporting. Your Honors, as you will have a confirmation brief, Mr. Duterte also provided the direct perpetrators with weapons, ammunition, and logistical support to facilitate the commission of the charged crime. And he also had control, wide control over those crimes. And let me now turn specifically to that control. As mayor of Davao and later as president of the Philippines, Mr. Duterte wielded ultimate influence, and authority over the physical perpetrators of the crimes. As mayor, Mr. Duterte was chief executive of the Davao city government, with responsibility for exercising general supervision and control over all its activities. He had formal operational supervision and control over National Police Unit in Davao. As creator and head of the DDS, he also had de facto control over the death squad's members. When Mr. Duterte became president on the 30th of June 2016, he sat at the very apex of the political power structure in the Philippines. He became the head of state, head of government, and commander-in-chief of all armed forces of the Philippines. He also became the leader of the country's police forces. This level of authority allowed him to wield de jure and de facto control over those implementing the common plan nationwide. Mr. Duterte's control over the crime is also apparent from his ability to interrupt their commission when he so chooses. And as outlined in our reconfirmation brief, he successfully suspended police anti-illegal drug operation on 2 occasions following public outcries in response to particularly notorious killings. On both occasions, the number of reported killings dropped significantly during the suspension, showcasing his control. So when he asks people to act, they act. When he asks them to refrain, they do so. So they oblige. So Mr. Duterte was well aware of the authority he had over the perpetrators. In a speech given to the National Bureau of Investigation in November 2016, he expressly acknowledged his position of power. And this is what he said. To the military, I am commander-in-chief. On the civilian side, I am the chief executive of the government. And when talking about the police, this is what he's saying. They are my subordinate, and I am ultimately responsible for their deeds. And these are quotations, and they can be found at tab 131.2 of our prosecution list of materials at ERN PHL-OTP-00095679, page 0004, and the relevant lines are from 131 to 134. And the direct perpetrators complied with Duterte's order and respected his authority. Mr. Duterte was respected by the physical perpetrators. He was feared, and his order and instruction were obeyed. One insider witness explicitly says that the police killed, and I quote, because of the directive of the president. This is what the witness saying, an insider. And this quote can be found at tab 120 of the prosecution list of material, ARN PHL OTP -0088631-R01 and page 66. And the relevant line are from 2304 to 2306. And this statement is corroborated by other statements we have also provided. And some direct perpetrator complied because of their blind loyalty to Mr. Duterte. Some did it out of fear, and others were encouraged to comply by promises of money and rewards. For some, killings reach the level of a perverse form of competition with effort to attain killing quotas, which in turn would lead to promotions and rewards. Others felt there was no other choice but to comply. One insider explaining that it was simply not possible to not obey Mr. Duterte's command. And this is also from an insider witness. And this evidence can be found at tab 51 of the prosecution list of materials, ERN PHL-OTP-001-5403 at page 0008 to 0009, and the relevant line here is from 240 to 245. Direct perpetrators were further emboldened to commit crime by Mr. Duterte's repeated promises of immunity. In various public statements, Mr. Duterte vowed to protect the police involved in killing. And this is what he said again. For as long as there is a power to pardon in the Constitution, that's my weapon against crime. If you massacre 100 and there are 100 of you, then you will all be pardoned. Restored to full political and civil rights, plus a promotion to boot. It's like that, especially the high profile. And this quote can be found at tab 130.2 of the prosecution list of materials at ERN PHL-OTP and 50336 at page 0010. Such statements reassure the physical perpetrators. One insider described that he felt confident to continue killing people because he knew that he wouldn't be arrested for that. And this evidence can be found at tab 38 of the prosecution list of material, ERN PHL-001-2779 at page 0005, and relevant lines are from 130 to 131. Your Honors, let me now say a few words about the contextual elements. The 78 murders and attempted murders that Mr. Duterte is charged with in this case were not random. These were not random crimes, nor was they spontaneous or happened in isolation. Rather, the evidence demonstrates that they were part of a widespread and systematic attack directed against the civilian population of the Philippines. The murders and attempted murders were carried out across the Philippines and over a substantial period of time. Overall, Duterte's so-called war on drugs resulted in the killings of thousands of civilians from the 1st of November 2011 to the 16th of March 2019. And many of these victims were...
Excuse me, counsel, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay. Yes, were children. The victim of extrajudicial killing charge in this case were brutally murdered, some after having been abducted and mistreated. Unlike Mr. Duterte, who is represented by his counsel here today, they were deprived of any form of due process. The loss of every single one of these victims had the most profound impact on their families, their friends, and ultimately their communities. Their suffering was met not merely with Mr. Duterte's indifference, but with his mocking. In a 25 July 2016 speech, he expressly made fun of the iconic photograph portraying the partner of an extrajudicial killing victim cradling his body, which now visible on our screen. While the specific incident portrayed in this photograph is not charged in this case, Mr. Duterte's comment on it is demonstrative of his attitude towards the victims. In reference to this photo, Mr. Duterte, this is what he said. Those of you who are still sober, those who haven't tried illegal drugs, if you don't want to die or get hurt, don't rely on the priest, including human rights advocate. They won't be able to prevent death. So, don't do it. And then, there you are, sprawled on the ground, and you are portrayed in a broadsheet like Mother Mary cradling the dead cadaver of Jesus Christ. That's how they are creating dramas here. This is what he said. And this quote can be found at tab 128 of the prosecution list of material at ERN PHL-OTP-50335, page 0008. And of course, the question of whether Mr. Duterte had knowledge and intent, of course, it goes without saying. Your Honors, Mr. Duterte intended and knew that the charged crime were occurring, or that they would occur in the ordinary course of event that he had set in place and put in motion. His intent and knowledge are shown by the multiple statements he made throughout his mayoral and presidential tenure, promising to reduce crimes by killing alleged criminals, promoting the common plan, and urging police and even members of the public to kill alleged criminals. As detailed in the prosecution pre-confirmation brief, and as Your Honor will hear in the course of my team's presentation, Mr. Duterte also made statements directly acknowledging allegation of extrajudicial killings by his subordinates and issued written order showing he knew about the crimes they committed. Your Honors, the prosecution relies on significant and varied sources of evidence to demonstrate that substantial ground exists to believe that Mr. Duterte is criminally responsible for the crimes. This evidence includes multiple witness statements, including insider witnesses. It includes many speeches of Mr. Duterte himself, as well as the statement of his co-perpetrators. It also includes orders and other documents signed by himself. The prosecution further relies on official government documents, including material from the Philippine National Police. It relies on drug watch lists, on audio and video material, as well as on forensic and financial evidence. Your Honors, during the prosecution's subsequent presentation My colleague will elaborate on some of these core evidence in more detail. Mr. Nichols will give a presentation on Mr. Duterte's background, followed by an overview of the evidence demonstrating his responsibility for the crime charged in count 1. This will be followed by the presentation of Mr. Jeremy behind me, who will speak about the evidence demonstrating Mr. Duterte's responsibility as president for the crime charged in count 2 and 3. And Ms. Croft, on my left, will then elaborate on the contextual element of crime against humanity and the mode of liability through which Mr. Duterte is responsible for the crimes alleged in this case. And to conclude, Madam President, Your Honor, while this court cannot reunite victims with their loved one, it can help reveal the truth about what happened to them and bring a sense of justice to the victim. The charges before you today are serious, and the evidence submitted require their confirmation. And Mr. Duterte must be held to account, and this case should be confirmed for trial. I thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. Now we are slightly in advance on our schedule. I will now hand over to the legal representative of victims for her opening statements until 11, and then after that you shall continue. Please proceed, ma'am.
Madam President, Your Honors, by way of an opening statement, we convey the views and concerns of the 497 victims authorized to participate in these proceedings. At the outset, Your Honors, we communicate the very deep disappointment of the victims at the decision allowing Rodrigo Duterte not to be present in this stage of confirmation of charges. The sight of Mr. Duterte being read and being confronted with the grave and horrible charges against him would have constituted a vital component of justice for the victims. This case symbolically represents the last boat that the victims can board to go on a journey in search of justice for their loved ones who were brutally killed upon the orders of Mr. Duterte. If this chamber prevents the boat from sailing by not confirming the charges, the victims will forever be moored in an island where the nights are filled with the screams and cries of their massacred loved ones. There is absolutely no other recourse for the victims. No less than former Philippine Justice Secretary Crispin Remulla admitted just a few months ago that the door to domestic justice is permanently closed for victims of the Duterte extrajudicial killings. Remulla declared, and we quote, "It is difficult to prove the case here and build up the case because those who need to speak are involved in the crime. There's nothing, not even a police report. You don't have a scene of the crime, you don't have ballistics, you don't have DNA." Remulla further declared, and I quote, "Everything that could be erased was erased so that the cases would not push through. That is why this has reached the ICC." Under the Philippine justice system, Your Honors, no criminal case can reach the courts unless they are initiated and filed by the Department of Justice or the Office of the Ombudsman. From Justice Secretary Remulla has been appointed as ombudsman. So the two gatekeepers of justice are successively occupied by a ranking official who has declared that there is absolutely no hope for domestic justice for the victims. If the charges are not confirmed in this case, one of the gravest concerns of the victims is that Mr. Duterte will return to the Philippines as a conquering hero. He will resume preaching his gospel of impunity. In fact, if Mr. Duterte could threaten to slap the judges of this court, which he did while he was president, this chamber should imagine the kind of terror-filled threats and the violent actions that can easily be used against the victims if the suspect walks free from this court. If the charges are not confirmed, it is a very serious concern of the victims that Mr. Duterte will be portrayed in history by his multitude of followers as the leader who vanquished the ICC and who cleansed his country of 30,000 rapists, murderers, and dangerous criminals, which were the scornful words he sweepingly used against all those who were killed in his murderous spree. Your Honors, Mr. Duterte has been in detention here in The Hague for almost a year now, but there has been no peace and rest for the victims. From the time their loved ones were killed and continuously up to this time, they lived in constant fear for their lives. The arrest and detention of Mr. Duterte has not stopped impunity in the Philippines. The virus of impunity that he spread all over the country has become a cancer that has metastasized, infecting millions of Filipinos. Mr. Duterte has created clones of himself. He converted millions of peace-loving citizens into bloodthirsty disciples who have become converts to the belief that violence and killings are valid solutions to societal problems. The killings masterminded by Mr. Duterte continue to have consequences for the victims even to this day because of his clones. These mini Dutertes harass, threaten, or commit outright violence against the victims and their families. As shown by the number of victims participating in this proceeding so far, many still fear to come out and tell their stories of how their lives became a living hell as a result of Mr. Duterte's crimes, and because they are constantly terrified of being targeted with violence by Duterte fanatics. Many victims have been hesitant to participate in this ICC case because they live in communities that thrive with Duterte clones. They see the halls of power of their country teeming with Duterte disciples. They see and hear senators, congresspersons, mayors, governors, and powerful public figures who are mini Dutertes. The daughter of Mr. Duterte is the vice president, and she has just recently declared that she is running for president in 2028. One Duterte son is a congressman. Another is the Davao City mayor, and his grandchildren occupy positions of power. The plague of impunity has spread not only among Filipinos in the Philippines, but even among expatriate Filipinos in faraway lands like here in The Hague. When we reported to the victims that we, their external legal representatives, feel like fugitives.
Apologies, counsel, it's 11 o'clock.
What do you say? When we reported to the victims that we, their external legal representatives, feel like fugitives who avoid our own countrymen here in The Hague,
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Council. We will now take a half-hour break as provided for in the schedule, and you shall resume your remarks at 11:30. These are the rules that are set in the schedule, which was set in paragraph 18 of the decision.
Council, you can continue because we were interrupted by the pause. Over to you, legal representative for victim, please.
Thank you, Your Honors. I was in the process of explaining the spread of impunity in the Philippines, and I will resume, Your Honor. The plague of impunity has spread. They express their utmost concern that if we, their lawyers, feel threatened by mini Dutertes in a foreign country, we should imagine the far more intense fear they live with every day in their communities teeming with mini Dutertes. The victims also wish to convey that if the judges of this honorable chamber can be subjected to online harassment by Duterte clones, we should imagine the level of vulnerability the victims are exposed to in their poor villages. Your Honors, there is only one solution to stop the impunity propagated by Mr. Duterte from continuing to bring harm and suffering to the victims. And that is for this honorable chamber to confirm the charges so that witnesses can testify and evidence can be presented on the horrible crimes committed by Mr. Duterte. The testimonies and evidence presented will inoculate these mini Dutertes from the virus of impunity that has infected them. When they will see and hear the utter cruelty, the sheer brutality, in other words, the brazen inhumanity of the crimes committed by Mr. Duterte, and the humanity of those whose lives were violently taken, it will rekindle the embers of humanity that still remain in their hearts. Many of these mini Dutertes or Duterte clones are actually victims of massive doses of fake news widely circulated online. They need to be vaccinated with the truth, and the truth vaccine can only come from the testimonies of victims and evidence presented in a trial before this court. Truth is the antidote to the virus of impunity, Your Honors. The victims dread a future where charges are not confirmed in this case. It will mean that the virus of impunity will continue to spread and infect many more. Victims fear that Duterte clones will become an even bigger group that can elect another apostle of impunity as the Philippines' next leader. If that happens, an even more serious condition of impunity can take place in the Philippines, possibly worse than the orgy of violence that happened from 2011 to 2019, and this time there will be no ICC to run to for assistance and help. The victims humbly beseech this honorable chamber to reaffirm the two crucial objectives of the ICC identified in the preamble of the Rome Statute. First, to prosecute and punish the most serious crimes that deeply shock the conscience of humanity. And second, to put an end to impunity and to contribute to the prevention of crimes of unimaginable atrocities. If this chamber confirms the charges, this court will achieve its first objective of prosecuting and, if convicted, punishing Mr. Duterte for the unspeakable crimes he is charged with. But achieving the first objective will not automatically make this court attain its second objective. Merely putting forward the evidence gathered and the theory of liability of the prosecution will not necessarily resolve the second objective. This court should allow victims to testify, and the record of the proceedings must reflect the harrowing experiences of those impacted against humanity. It is the brutality. In other words, the utter inhumanity of the crimes masterminded by Mr. Duterte, so that the people who adore and idolize him, the people who have become disciples of impunity, will see for themselves the inhumanity of the suspect. For this to happen, the charges should all be confirmed. The virus of impunity that has spread all over the Philippines is very grave and serious, Your Honors. Imagine a leader like Mr. Duterte, who proudly and publicly proclaimed his aspirations of following the footsteps of Adolf Hitler when he said, quote, "Hitler massacred 3 million Jews. Now there are 3 million drug addicts. I'd be happy to slaughter them," unquote. And yet, he is worshipped by a huge number of Filipinos. In so many countries, you will need to hide your adoration of Hitler. Mr. Duterte flaunted it, and his fanatics are unaffected by it. Mr. Duterte has pronounced so many other horrible declarations meant to promote and encourage impunity, as it will be detailed tomorrow by my colleagues. And yet, he is idolized by a multitude of Filipinos. The defense will claim that he was merely bombastic and acerbic when he made these statements. But if he were merely being pompous and flippant, the people who were killed should be alive and laughing today at his supposed pranks and stunts. Mr. Duterte did not only order the mass killing of people suspected of being drug personalities, Your Honors. He smeared them with accusations of being rapists, murderers, and dangerous criminals. Mr. Duterte imposed an inflexible condemnation that if you are a drug personality, you are automatically a dangerous criminal who has engaged in unimaginable atrocities. The families of those killed did not only suffer the loss of a loved one, their families were even disgraced with being associated with a rapist, murderer, or dangerous criminal. Even after their loved ones were murdered, many families were subjected to deplorable injustices. Instead of gunshot wounds as cause of death in their death certificates, families were shocked to see pneumonia, heart attack, stroke, sepsis, and other false causes of death that were instead written down. Other families were charged substantial amounts, sums the impoverished families could not afford, just to retrieve the bodies of their loved ones from the funeral parlor who were suspected by the families of being in cahoots with the police officers. Some family members were even arrested and imprisoned by police officers on false charges and for the purpose of preventing them from complaining. In one particular incident, Your Honors, a young man and his common-law wife were sleeping in their shanty when men in civilian clothes knocked down the door to their house. The men dragged the wife out of the room. The husband was already surrendering, and he even started to strip naked to show he had no drugs or firearm on his body. He said in the Filipino language, "Sir, malinis po ako, maghuhubad ako, sir." Translation in English, "Sir, I am clean. I will strip naked, sir." Still without mercy, the men shot and killed him. After killing the husband, they arrested the wife and accused her with falsified and non-bailable charges. When the deceased mother and cousin went to the police station to find out what happened to the young man, because they were not in the scene of the crime when it happened, the two were also summarily arrested and charged with fabricated crimes. If the Honorable Chamber confirms the charges in this case, the witnesses will and evidence will show that those who were smeared by Mr. Duterte before they were killed, they were inside their houses, sleeping peacefully with their families, eating meals with their loved ones, playing with their children, or hugging their wives. Others were merely walking along the street, having snacks at the roadside eatery, or plying the road, earning a poor man's living. They were all doing ordinary, peaceful, and plain human activities. Confirming the charges will restore the dignity of those who were killed and the honor of their families. The prejudice suffered by the families of those killed did not begin and end with the killings of their loved ones. Each killing set off a chain reaction that is continuously churning out a daily crucible of harm, damage, and loss. By masterminding the mass murder of mere suspects, Mr. Duterte has brought irreparable and endless harm to the families. An overwhelming majority of those killed were the sole breadwinners of poor families. These families were dependent on each day's wage for their daily sustenance. They were hand-to-mouth families. With the death of their breadwinners, the widowed spouses, a majority of whom are women, have had to take on the roles of two parents. On top of taking care of their children and maintaining the household, the widowed spouses now have the additional burden of being breadwinners for their families. Families have been driven to even far more serious destitution, Your Honors. The damage to the children is immeasurable. Their development and upbringing have been permanently compromised. They have been walking through life with one missing parental limb. Losing a parent under very dire economic conditions and under the most violent circumstances results in wounds that will never heal and that will absolutely render them handicapped for life. And then there's the indescribable anguish of parents who lost a child. No parent is supposed to outlive a child. Parents suffer a lifetime of grief when a child dies ahead of them, and the lifetime grief circumstances. The crimes masterminded by Mr. Duterte did not only affect individuals but whole communities. Across the Philippines, numerous urban communities of the most impoverished villages were scarred by the violence and abuses wrought by a lawless anti-drug campaign that further worsened the misery and trauma of residents in marginalized communities. In one illustrative instance, Your Honors, after the father of a family was killed inside his house by police officers, the entire neighborhood was so traumatized that for almost 3 months, and during the coldest months in the Philippines, they abandoned their houses at night and instead slept in the open public market. They did not feel secure inside their houses because there would be no witnesses if the police would just barge in and shoot at them. In the public market, the presence of many witnesses, they thought, will deter the police from shooting and killing them. It is also the victim's view, Your Honors, that the charges should be confirmed because the resulting presentation of witnesses and evidence during the trial will force police and other law enforcement officers to confront the brazen depravity of the killing of civilians that they either personally committed or allowed to be committed during the Duterte reign of terror. In one operation, the police summarily killed 3 men, 2 brothers and 1 friend, in the very early morning. The police declared that the 3 were nanlaban. They fought back. But the neighbors saw otherwise. The whole neighborhood was so horrified at the macabre treatment of one of the fatalities. The bullet-ridden body of one of the 3 men was brought out from the 2nd floor window and dropped to the ground because the police could not bring the body out through the doorway. When the body hit the ground, the neighbors recoiled at hearing the body emit a cry, aray. Translation in English, ouch. The man was still alive when his body was thrown to the ground, and the police just left him to bleed to death. The trial will hold a mirror to the police force and compel them to see how they were turned into executioners and assassins, and their organization transformed into a gigantic criminal organization or turned into a killing machine by Mr. Duterte. The Philippine National Police and the drug enforcement agencies have not made any initiative to purify the corrupted minds of their officers and personnel to our knowledge. The trial in this case will be a tremendous teaching opportunity that can work to rectify the warped and depraved minds of Philippine security officers. The charges need to be confirmed, Your Honors, for the sake of the entire country, which has been desensitized or made numb by the massive incidents of impunity and the glorification of impunity promoted by Mr. Duterte. The whole Philippines needs to know the real story during those bloody years. There has been no opportunity for the entire country to really find out the whole truth of what happened. It has been hush-hush, tidbits of sporadic news, and always drowned out by trolls who mass produce and broadcast false, fake, and fabricated news. The victims also attach a very important historical significance to this case. If the Chamber confirms the charges, the trial proceedings will produce a historical record of the most bloody period of post-war Philippine history, a duty that the Philippine justice system has refused to perform. The historical account on the mass murder of so many Filipinos during the Duterte regime needs to be accessible to our future generations, just like the Nuremberg trials and the Tokyo trials, so that they will learn from it and not repeat the same mistake of selecting and glorifying leaders who preach and practice impunity. The prosecution has presented 78 instances of murder and attempted murder, clarifying that these incidents are only representatives of the extent of the crimes committed against thousands of civilians, Your Honors. The victims beseech the Honorable Chamber to remember that Mr. Duterte's bloody rule, both in Davao City and nationwide, resulted in as many as 30,000 victims of killings, more than 300,000 victims of arbitrary imprisonment, and unaccounted numbers of victims of torture, sexual assault, and other forms of crimes against humanity. For many families in the Philippines, the charges brought for confirmation in these proceedings represent only a fraction of the reality the victims have endured. The victims beseech the Honorable Chamber to remember the hundreds of thousands of victims are banking on vicarious justice from this case. Finally, Your Honors.
Excuse me, Counsel, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. Finally, Your Honors, the victims wish to humbly underline that what is ultimately at stake in these proceedings is the supreme of all forms of human rights, the right to life. The right to life is the very foundation of every civilized society. The ancestors of every nation fought against invaders, colonizers, despotic monarchs, and fascist leaders in order to secure the right to life of their families, their communities, and the future generations. The heroes of every country sacrificed their lives to defend the right to life of their people. We, as citizens of modern societies, are inheritors and beneficiaries of the sacrifices of our ancestors who bequeathed to us the right to life. We owe it to them to defend the supreme legacy for our generation and for the generations to come. For the past few years, Your Honors, we have seen an increasing number of nation leaders who time-traveled from the Dark Ages and now swagger in modern times as if they own people's lives. These brutal and cruel leaders must be held to account for their brazen disregard of humankind's right to life. Our ancestors fought in the battlefield to secure a right to life. In these modern times, the battleground for the fight to protect our right to life is within the four walls of this honorable court. May the God of life, the God of humanity, guide the honorable members of this chamber. Thank you, Your Honors.
Merci beaucoup, Maître
Judge Motog. Thank you very much, Counsel Boutourian. Now over to the defence. Mr. Kaufman, please.
Madam President, thank you, Your Honours. And I thank Mr. Boutourian for his intervention. But I feel that I ought to remind him that this is a court of law which decides matters on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of political demagoguery, and not on the basis of a desire to effect regime change despite the democratic will. And certainly not on the basis of statements made by Ombudsman Jesus Crispin Remula, who professed that domestic justice will be denied, according to Mr. Boutourian, because of the lack of forensic reports and police reports. Now, I don't know which case Mr. Boutourian's metaphorical ship sailed into, but he clearly hasn't read the evidence. Whilst he was speaking, we examined the evidence, and out of that evidence, we found at least 35 reports substantiating 49 of the incidents which are mentioned in a document containing the charges. Your Honours, Rodrigo Duterte was and will always remain a unique phenomenon. His style of statesmanship was novel and unpalatable to many. His expletives and hyperbole grated, while his honesty and wild popularity irritated. He spoke openly, from the heart, sincerely and truthfully. And what a contrast between him and his successor in the Malacanang. For President Rudy, his word was his word, and the people knew it. For President Bong Bong, his word is for the wind, and the people will not forget it. Let me remind everyone of the letter which President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed, it's on the screen, and in which he gave a cast-iron undertaking that his government, and I quote, will not assist the ICC in any way, shape or form. Well, as we know, he failed to keep that promise. Rodrigo Duterte was unconstitutional and unceremoniously hauled off to The Hague. And when called upon to defend his master's actions and the said letter at a Senate committee hearing, the then Secretary for Justice, once again Mr. Jesus Crispin Remula, persisted with the same dishonest theme. And I quote his words, "We did not assist the ICC. We continue with the very tenor of the letter that we did not assist the ICC and we did not have any contact with them." So he said, but with a document emanating from the prosecution team opposite and disclosed to us a mere week ago, not as information material to the preparation of our defence, but as exonerating evidence, we can now substantiate what we have suspected for a long time. The document comprises a transcript of a telephone call covertly recorded between four parties who cannot be mentioned in public, and one of these parties was boasting about how he was acting as the silent partner of President BBM, managing a scheme to funnel witnesses to this court while all the time ensuring that he could guarantee President BBM's plausible deniability. So it is indeed the defence case that President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. set out to neutralise Rodrigo Duterte and his legacy. Yes, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor, I used that legendary word, neutralise, so central and so essential to your case theory, because you know just as well as me that I'm using the term metaphorically. And now I turn to the substance of the charges, but before I do, a word or two about the geopolitical context. The scourge of illegal narcotics is not unique to the Philippines. As we all know, it afflicts Latin America, where I can name 3 countries where the death rate at the hands of vigilantes and law enforcement agents per capita population is higher than it ever was under Duterte. And as you should know, and you will hear from the prosecution, at any rate, the Philippines as a country is uniquely positioned to act as a transit hub for the trafficking of narcotics emanating from the cartels in China. And with or without Duterte, so we argue, the death rate would have kept on rising. Indeed, as we will prove with statistics and reports, the death rate flowing from narcotics-related crime actually increased after Rodrigo Duterte left power. And where, I ask you, has the International Criminal Court been seen that Rodrigo did anything? The totally lawful Duterte campaign against illegal drugs and their suppliers took place when his administration was exposed to the tyranny of oppression and the abuse of power by the elite. And he took a decision. On that day, he chose to devote himself to a life of selfless public service. As a professor at the local police academy and as a public prosecutor in Davao, Rodrigo Duterte developed a lifelong passion, some would say an enduring obsession, for law and order, something for which he unapologetically enforced throughout his time as mayor of Davao City. Not, as the prosecution say, through sowing murder and mayhem, but through winning the love, respect and admiration of his fellow citizens. The very same citizens who continued to re-elect him time after time, term after term, on no less than 7 occasions over more than 2 decades. And throughout his 20 or so years tenure as the mayor of Davao, Rodrigo Duterte and his family transformed that city from an outpost of communist insurgency and criminal violence into what is now one of the safest cities, not just in the Philippines, but in the entire world. This was indeed the so-called Davao model, which the prosecution wants to persuade you was code for unbridled criminal violence. And this was the type of leader that the Filipino nation wanted in 2016. So, Rodrigo Duterte was elected into power, not in spite of, but specifically because of his firm and uncompromising commitment to upholding law and order. And after his election as president, Rodrigo Duterte remained a man of the people, without seeking to patronize the people. Gung-ho in his ways and with a belligerent tone, he spoke the tough tongue of the street, not the dissembling discourse of international diplomacy. He said what the people wanted to hear, but he said it in a way that offended sensibilities of world leaders unaccustomed to hearing it, one in particular, and that was what set him on the slippery slope to a prison cell in The Hague. And let me tell you how it works. It starts with the media, controlled by the powerful and the politically influential. With a sensational headline and a twisted editorial slant, the moguls sell their papers while promoting the partisan agenda of their backers in power. They highlight the salacious content while ignoring the true context, because that is what captivates the reader. And so it was with Rodrigo Duterte, whose speeches were fertile fodder for his enemies and detractors. A man whose hyperbole, bluster and rhetoric, once published, became a natural target for privately funded NGOs and human rights activists, a loose collective more commonly known as civil society. These people descended upon the Philippines to advance an agenda even more lacking in objectivity than that of the media. And heavily funded by tycoons with even grander designs, they print their glossy reports, replete with iconic photographic images of grieving families and dead bodies in rain-swept, nighttime crime scenes, all dramatically illuminated with the fluorescent glow of neon. Images carefully crafted to shock the conscience and to sway the emotions, and, I may say, to be used by the prosecutor when they don't even relate to the charges. And they gave their slick reports bold titles lifted straight out of a James Bond movie, such as License to Kill, One Shot to the Head, You Can Die Any Time, or simply, They Just Kill. The photographers are feted and their shots exhibited as art all over the world, and the brave journalists who act as their sources win awards and Nobel Prizes. And slowly but surely, their narrative becomes the sacred, unchallengeable, and unshakable truth. And so the pressure builds up, and the academics who haunt the corridors of the progressive left law faculties far away in the United States tweet their research and publish their articles pontificating about crimes against humanity, systematic attacks against the civilian population, and they point their finger at one man alone, and bandy about slogans such as accountability and the prevention of impunity. They give their gratuitous advice on what should be done, sometimes academics who formerly worked alongside the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Communications and complaints are filed, and the rest, as they say, is history. In any event, we're not gathered here today to judge a man on the basis of his coarse attitude or his vulgar language. This court has convened a confirmation hearing to verify whether substantial grounds exist to believe that Rodrigo Duterte, the people's president, together with various so-called co-perpetrators, over the years of his governance, devised a criminal policy of wholesale and wanton murder. And since we are in a court of law, it is worth stressing, although I should not have to, cases are decided on the basis of evidence, not supposition, not rumour, not spicy gossip, and certainly not on the basis of political rhetoric and bluster. Because at the end of the day, were it not for those belligerent and controversial speeches, there would have been no impetus to bring the people's president to The Hague. And when the prosecution's evidence is examined, I would ask you to keep an open mind and to question not just whether that evidence has been selectively presented, but whether there exists evidence which the prosecution has failed to produce. And I say this with justifiable cause, particularly with respect to the Duterte rhetoric. As we will prove during the substantive part of our submissions, the notorious speeches on which the prosecution relies have been cherry-picked to suit its narrative, while ignoring the many other speeches when the former president tempered his bombastic language by clear reference to the principle of lawful self-defense. We, the defense, have read as many of these speeches as we can find. In fact, in our poky little office on the top floor of the furthest building away in this complex, we have a counter which ticks and ticks. And whenever we come across a speech which contradicts the prosecution's murder theory by reference to self-defense, we give a cheer, and the counter goes up once more, and we celebrate one more nail in the coffin of the prosecution's case theory. As the statistics stand as of today, in contrast to the 20 speeches on which the prosecution relies to prove incitement to kill, we have found 35 more which say the complete opposite. Let me give you two examples from the very speeches that the deputy prosecutor himself cited today. Let's refer first of all to the famous Pietà speech, which the deputy prosecutor referred to. So, this is what the deputy prosecutor said. Those of you who are still sober, those who haven't tried illegal drugs, if you don't want to die or get hurt, don't rely on the priests, including human rights advocates. They won't be able to prevent deaths, and so it goes on. But if we look further on in the very same speech, something which maybe the deputy prosecutor didn't do, this is what he had to say. To our police officers and other officials, do your job. and you will have the unwavering support of the office of the President. I will be with you all the way. Abuse your authority, and there will be hell to pay, for you will have become worse than criminality itself. Well, there you are. You have it straight in your face. Pexo, exonerating evidence within what is claimed to be the prosecution incriminating evidence. I won't take up my time by showing you the second speech, but there is one. If I have time at the end, I will show it to you. So if you add to that another 10 speeches out of the 20 speeches on which the prosecution rely in its document containing the charges. After all, we are in a court of law and we rely on evidence. And what is the evidence that's produced of these speeches? 20 of them. 10 of them, I submit, and we will show this in the substantive part of our submissions, contain exonerating evidence which support the defence case theory. In other words, if you add the 10, which we've identified in the prosecution's 20, to our total of 35, we come to 45 speeches versus 10, which we say support the use of force only in self-defence. That is 350% more speeches in favour of our defence and 354% more reasons not to confirm the charges. And you can bet your bottom dollar that at the end of today's proceedings, either the victim's self-styled legal assistant to ICC counsel or a prosecution intern will be tasked with scouring the web, looking for the means to prove Kaufman wrong. And I will declare it, and I'll declare it loudly and clearly, as if the prosecution didn't know it already. It's not enough to state that since the former president made those extremely inflammatory statements and deaths occurred, that he must, as a matter of course, be criminally responsible for those fatalities. At this stage of the proceedings, the prosecution needs to show substantial grounds to believe that the former president actually desired and foresaw that people would be killed as a result of his incendiary language. For the prosecution to assert that Rodrigo Duterte hoped for deaths to occur or was recklessly indifferent as to whether deaths would occur, which he was not, that's insufficient. So once more for the record, Rodrigo Duterte's language was aimed not at suspected drug pushers as the prosecution would have it, but directly at those poisoning society with their substances, and not, I stress, with lethal intent. His rhetoric was calculated to arouse fear and obedience, to instill fear in their hearts, and to inculcate a respect for the law in their minds. Nothing more, nothing less. That was his intent, and it was not criminal. And as many of these drug pushers demanded to enter prison, I remember seeing the images on the television, lining up to surrender and to enter prison. Now, I challenge my colleagues opposite to prove otherwise, because as we all know, in a criminal process, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. They brought this case and they need to prove it. Rodrigo Duterte need not convince the world of anything, and that is to his fortunate advantage given his current medical condition. And he stands behind his legacy resolutely, and he maintains his innocence absolutely. Now, I turn to the general fairness and objectivity of the investigation, which, as we all know, is meant to be an impartial evidence-gathering exercise. As an ex-prosecutor myself, I'm used to investigating agencies, pursuing all reasonable lines of inquiry, assimilating all testimonies, and digesting all documentation and forensic evidence, recommending who to target for prosecution, but not so with this prosecution. When we, the defence, study the course of the investigation in this case, one thing is plain as a pikestaff. The chief prosecutor of this court, Mr. Karim Khan, not only failed miserably to carry out his duties under the Rome Statute, requiring him to examine exonerating circumstances as well as incriminating, but he single-handedly contaminated it, so we alleged, by pursuing a one-track crusade with a view to a predetermined objective. Let me explain. Although the ICC officially authorized an investigation into the so-called Philippines situation in late 2021, it was deferred a few months later back to the Philippines for the official investigation to resume only in late 2023. But the real meat of the investigation into Count 1, relating to the activities of that fictitious construct, the Davao Death Squad, had effectively started way before then, with the sole objective of nailing Rodrigo Duterte. Indeed, all the way back in 2018, during its so-called preliminary examination, the prosecution had an individual who will be referred to as P1 handed to them on a silver platter. This P1 had been interviewed at an earlier date by none other than Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan in his former capacity as a private lawyer